Hello and welcome to Careers Unlocked, a podcast brought to you by the EY Foundation. If you don't already know us, the EY Foundation supports young people on free school meals to access paid work experience, employability skills and career guidance, and ultimately to further their opportunities in the world of work. We do this through a variety of programs and partnerships that meaningfully join up both sides of the labour market. I'm Kathryn Eastwood, Director of Income and Partnerships at the EY Foundation, and I'm so excited to be hosting the new season of our podcast. This is the second episode of Season 2, and it's another one that I know is going to be helpful for anyone listening, because today we're looking at a topic that's relevant to all of us, regardless of where we are on our career journeys. The theme of today's episode is acing an interview. What can you do to stand out? As in previous episodes, we'll be bringing together a young person and an industry expert to talk about their experiences and all things interviews. I will also certainly be chipping in, as I have plenty to say on the topic, as someone who has been on both sides of the table of many's an interview. We'll also be launching our next mini-sode in a couple of weeks, and regular listeners will know that mini-sodes are bite-sized segments that deliver practical tips on a whole range of topics to help you prepare for the workplace. If you have an idea on what you'd like to get advice on, please get in touch at communications@eyfoundation.ey.com. And for today's episode, we're delighted to be joined by Maria Owusu-Mensah and Antoni Davis-Phillip. So I'm going to just introduce our guests. Let's start with you, Maria. Maria graduated from the University of Manchester with a degree in chemical engineering in 2021, having also completed multiple prestigious internships across the sector. Currently, Maria is employed at BP on their grad scheme, where she works as an analyst in trade and shipping. Maria is currently co-chair of the EY Foundation's Youth Advisory Board and also sits as one of our young trustees, where she brings youth insights into strategic decision-making at EYF. And over to Antoni. Antoni is a managing consultant at Signify Technology, where he heads up one of the development teams in their Manchester office. Signify Technology are a global staffing agency committed to accelerating ambitions and connecting diverse and innovative talent to the companies that need them most. Antoni is also heavily involved in a lot of the company's charity and diversity projects. And outside of work, he can be found engaged in anything food, sport, or travel related. I actually have the pleasure of knowing both of our guests pretty well, and therefore I know that they have lots of interesting things to say. So without further ado, let's get started on today's episode. Firstly, welcome both. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you, Kathryn, and thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to meet you.
I'm good as well.
All right, Maria, I'm going to start with you if that's okay. You have taken part in a number of prestigious and interesting internships and successfully gained a place on the BP grad scheme as an analyst. So, how have you found the interview process at these big tech and banking companies?
I found them sometimes quite challenging because usually in large companies, there's different hurdles you have to go through before you even get to the in-person interview stage. You usually have to do a psychometric test and then sometimes a video interview and then sometimes a technical interview before you actually have your kind of final interview. So the stages is usually quite long and can be quite intense, especially if you're applying to multiple large firms. But I think in terms of how have I been able to kind of handle that? Preparation has been very key, having been prepared with an understanding actually firstly what type of interview I'm going to be going into so that I can actually prepare effectively has definitely been one of the, I'd say, key tips that have definitely been so helpful for me as well.
Okay, great. And then having been through quite a few interviews, not only for the job that you're currently in and those internships, but you've also gone through the EYF interview process too. Where do you see your strengths when it comes to the interview process?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think in terms of my strengths, I think because I don't go into an interview without preparation, I think I'm able to, through preparation, able to communicate effectively. I do my research on the company, so I like to understand what the company's values are and think of ways to demonstrate that through the interview, whether it comes up directly in questions or whether it doesn't as well. How do I actually ensure that I'm communicating or showing that actually I am a good fit for this particular company I'm applying to. I think that's been very, very important as well. I think also having, I guess, a personal alliance with the company in some form. So maybe the projects that they're working on, that my team would be working on, I'm quite passionate about. So that kind of makes me more confident in the interview because I'm actually passionate about what I'll be potentially working on as well.
Definitely. And as I said earlier on in the intro, interviews are something that we have to deal with throughout our entire career because gone are the days where we have one big long career. We're quite constantly moving around either within companies or between sectors. So we do have to think about them quite a lot. What areas do you struggle with or do you find a real challenge when it comes to interviews?
I'd say sometimes it can be my nerves. I think sometimes if you want a particular role really badly, you kind of feel like you've put so much on the line in terms of your preparation. And sometimes that can be quite overwhelming and can sometimes come through when I'm speaking as well. But I think for me, the best way to handle that has definitely been practicing in front of family, friends, practicing in the mirror. And it's also been just understanding that usually the interview stage is one of the final steps to securing that particular role. So understanding that if I've come this far, I must be good enough. I must be good enough to come this far. So kind of like retrieving confidence from that place as well, and also not being thrown off if I'm asked a question that I don't know the answer to or don't feel like I've answered that question well enough or as well as I could have. I'm not letting that throw me off the whole interview, but trying to continuously also show excellence and bounce back from that. And also maybe at the end when the interviewer says, "Oh, do you have any other thing you want to kind of talk about?" I could use that as an opportunity to kind of clarify maybe points I didn't clarify earlier as well. And I think also for me, it's very important. I'd say one of the biggest tips is definitely to ask questions to the interview at the end. But sometimes because I'm so nervous, I can sometimes forget what those questions I plan to ask are. So I'll usually just write them down in my notebook. So I come to the interview with my notebook and pen. So that's just one less thing to worry about in terms of the whole interview process.
Amazing. I mean, you gave so many tips in there. I feel like we need to, if you're listening, go back and write them all down. But I think something that you said at the beginning around nerves and how to handle that is something that really resonated with me too, because I think we can get so caught up in the interview and the pressure and wanting to say exactly what we planned and almost be a bit scripted that actually, if you take a step back and change your mindset around it, you think about the fact that to be invited to interview, you're already a long way of the way there. The people, they want to meet you, they think that you're qualified for the job and they want to find out more about you. So sometimes it's that mindset shift, isn't it? And really just reminding yourself to zoom out a bit and remember what the interview actually is. It's a conversation about yourself. But yeah, thank you so much for that, Mary. And we'll come back and get some more tips from you a bit further in the episode. But Anthony, I'm gonna move to you now. So in your career, am I right to say that it's likely that you've very much been on both sides of the table as interviewee and interviewer? So, in that case, what do you find the most challenging things on both of those sides for you?
Yeah, both sides sort of bring different challenges, we could say. And I guess some things you might not even think of or sort of let slip by. If I particularly look at, if I'm the interviewer, little things like unconscious bias. When we make a judgment or a decision based on our sort of prior experience or even similarity bias, for example, if I'm interviewing someone that supports Arsenal, it's very hard not to favour them at all. Or someone that has similar qualities to me or has maybe come from a similar background, maybe went to the same university. Little areas like that, you've got to make sure that you snap out of and sort of stay to the books or as professional as you can. I guess also when you're being the interviewer, preparation is key. If you're doing a lot of interviews, say we've got multiple people coming in one day, or I've done quite a lot of interviews that week, it's easily to sort of let my preparation for the interview down a little bit.
Mm.
Say, I'm not going in with the right questions for that person. If I'm interviewing a senior, if I'm interviewing a junior, I need to make sure I have different questions available. I need to make sure that I know the candidate. And I also need to be ready for any questions that they might sort of ask for me. These things are easily forgotten. especially if you're doing multiple things. So that can be quite challenging as well. But we also, one of the most important things is making sure, even if I've done a lot of interviews that day, even if I've done a lot of interviews that week, I'm explaining the structure of the interview to the person, and I'm not just getting caught in, here we go, another one. I think there's some stats out there that maybe there's 20% increase in performance once a candidate knows the structure of the interview beforehand. So if you can explain that to them, it's going to be really important for them to perform their best and to get the best out of them. But the positives, especially when I be in the interviewer, if you find someone that makes you say, yes, we need to hire them, it all makes it worth it. No matter how many interviews that you've done before or sort of how many questions we've been over, if you get that feeling, especially if you're with colleagues and you report back to the rest of the team that you get that feeling that, yes, we've got someone here that we need to hire, it's all worth it. And I guess if I flip it on the interviews that I have done as well, I guess the answers could be very similar as well. I know particularly especially if I think back to the times when I was applying for my first sort of jobs outside of university, you're doing a lot of interviews. You've got to do a lot of interviews to make sure you're securing a replacement. You're going to get a lot of no's. You've got to try different areas to see what you like. I liked what Maria said as well about finding a company that's got the right values for you. That's going to be difficult to find. So you're doing a lot of interviews. You've also got to make sure you keep that same energy for every interview. Even if you've done multiple interviews that day, you've done multiple interviews that week, if you're getting to a stage where you're getting tired, you said the same answers over and over, you can't let the people that you interview and see your energy drop or get that feeling that you're not too bothered. So one of the difficulties there is just making sure you keep that same energy for every interview that you're doing, no matter what stage it is. Even if a company you're going into might not be your favorite beforehand, by the end of that interview, they could be the ones that go to the top of the list, which is actually something that happened with Signify Technology for me. I wasn't too sure if I even wanted to interview there at the beginning. The company was quite small, office was very small, but by the end of the interview or by the end of the three, it got to a stage where it's gone from, I'm not sure if I want to interview here, to how can I not join them? So if I didn't go into it with that same sort of energy, I might not have never known that. We might never have got to the opportunity. So yeah, difficulties, just making sure you keep the same energy throughout your whole interview process.
Brilliant. I feel like you, again, there's so many great points in there, but something really interesting on the challenges side of things in terms of being an interviewer is that idea of there's a real risk of leaning towards what sometimes people call cultural fit, but actually that's often just another way of what we could say is unconscious bias. I think it's such a strong reminder to anybody listening who might be on that interviewer side of the table to challenge yourself and to think about really dismantling what we mean by cultural fit. And actually often just hiring in our own image or in somebody who you think might be a really comfortable or easy hire in the team is actually quite unfair. And we need to constantly challenge ourselves there. But
Absolutely.
and again, something that you really pulled out in terms of preparation on both sides, because of course Maria talked lots about being prepared for going through an interview as the interviewee, but actually I think what you were saying, Antoni, is really important too, that actually if you're not really prepared as the interviewer, then it's quite unfair for the candidate because you want to, it's our responsibility to put the best structures in place for that person to be able to bring their whole selves to the interview and to give everything that they can and to really portray themselves well.
Yeah, and just going back to that culture fit as well, we want people that are going to add to the culture, not just fit in. So if we're sticking with that bias, we're not going to grow. We're not going to sort of bring people in that can bring new ideas. We're just going to get people the same that are thinking the same. So what you really want to be looking for is people that can add to your culture, not just fit.
Yeah, hopefully that's really important for people to hear when you're thinking about going to an interview. Companies want that diversity of thought, diversity of perspective. So it's being able to let your personality and your ideas shine through in the interview as well. And, be able to stand out and bring your whole personality to it too. Really, really interesting. Thank you. Antoni, if we can stick with you and thinking about interviews in a bit more depth, can you explain to us the different types of interview questions that a candidate might be asked?
Yeah, sure. There's quite a few. I'm going to run through particularly sort of some of the key ones. And one of the key sort of questions that we ask candidates is competency-based questions. Now, these look at behavior-based interview questions that sort of assess a candidate's skills and ability through sort of targeted questions on maybe their past experience. For example, that could be, what's been your biggest achievement to date? Or maybe what does success look like to you? And what we're really doing here is sort of evaluating essential skills for our role and determining if they have those skills, if they're going to be sort of match up to the requirements that we have. Competency-based questions is a bit of a mouthful for me saying competency. Based questions keep consistency and fairness, but they also help sort of me, when I'm asking questions, feel more confident about what I'm asking. I know that I am being fair. I know that I'm sticking to the sort of the process. And the reason I want to sort of touch on these particular questions as well is because we're sort of coached on how to get the best out of answers as well as looking for strong answers. One of the techniques that we're actually given when it comes to answering competency-based questions is using the STAR technique. Now, STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. So if you're looking at the situation, it sort of describes the situation or problem that you had to deal with. If I ask someone, for example, tell me a time you had to overcome hardship, the situation might be, I'm going to give a recruitment example here. Recently, a candidate didn't show up to a particular interview. Now, to expand on that further, what we're really looking for is to give a lot more than just give the situation about what happened. If you can explain your methods, how you got to sort of the end result, it's going to be so much more powerful than just explaining a situation or maybe even skipping to the results. So the task part, which is the T, might be where you're going to explain what the task of this situation might be. If we go back to that question of how do you come over hardship, well, the task was you needed to find a replacement. Now, moving on to sort of the action, this is where you need to describe the action, what you took to address the situation and task. So someone hasn't shown up to interview, we need to find a replacement. What's the action going to be? Well, the action might be, I went on LinkedIn and started messaging my talent pool or candidates I know to see if they will be able to step up or if they're going to be suitable to fill in. Now, the result, which is the final section, which is explaining the outcome and the action, what we've learned from it is, I was able to find a replacement. The client was really happy and we was able to move forward with a rescheduled interview. It's really important that candidates are sort of giving way more than just sort of answering the question, how did you overcome hardship? Recently, I had to find a replacement. The more detail you can give, the more it's going to show your ability, show your skills. Now, as an interviewer, we're actually coached to, if we're looking to get more out of a candidate, we might need to use this same technique in reverse as well. So if, say, for example, the question was, how did you overcome hardship? The next question might be, explain the task that you had to do. After that, they might, once they've explained it, describe the action. What was the end result? So we actually use this sort of technique on competency-based questions to sort of get the more out of candidates as well. But that is a real key one for us, particularly in a recruitment agency when we're having interviews, is competency-based questions.
Great. Can I just pause there for a second,
Of
Antoni,
course.
just to, Maria, is the STAR technique something that you have used yourself? And if so, do you find it useful? And if not, are there any other techniques that you use in your preparation for interviews?
Yeah, I definitely use the STAR technique with a little bit more of an extension. I think one of the first points to add to what Antoni has said so far as well is in terms of like the results, if you can phrase it in a form that includes some form of statistics or facts in some way, I think that makes your story and the point you're trying to get across more impactful as well. I would also add to that another R, which is reflection. So talking about what went well upon reflection and what you could have done better in that situation as well. It's a good way to kind of show that you're always continuously trying to improve, trying to be better, trying to show excellence. And I guess you're always trying to constructively criticize and give yourself or extract enough feedback as well to continuously improve. So those are two things I would add to that as well. Yeah.
I love that. So having some stats are a bit of an evidence-based approach to back up what you were saying about your own experience, and then adding that extra hour for reflection. So I guess you're demonstrating a growth mindset, which is what all employers want to see, and being able to do that in the moment and have that self-awareness, I think, is really powerful. Thank you. I feel like looking at Antoni's face, he was learning something during that answer as well.
Absolutely, that was fantastic. The more detail you can go into, the stats, that is fantastic. As an interviewer, if I heard someone sort of back up their results with some stats and figures, I'm listening more. It's very, very powerful. So that's great. And like you said, on the growth mindset, even if the results weren't sort of what they wanted or what they were trying to get out, we're not always looking for sort of the perfect 10 out of 10, ticks every boxes. Often when you'll see job descriptions, they're ticking this, and this. A lot of the time, they're HR wish lists. Those growth mindset is a really strong word to use there. I didn't get the result I wanted yet, or what I went and done was go away and find out what I needed to do better next time. Those sort of things are really, really powerful.
Definitely. So, Antoni, you talked us through the competency-based questions and the STAR technique. Were there any others that you wanted to highlight as well?
There is a few other questions or techniques that we'll run through as well. There's some strength-based questions where these explore what you enjoy doing, what you do well, how you work under pressure. On the flip side of that, I know as well, Maria, you mentioned also about weaknesses as well, or challenges, should I say. I really like some of the points there when you went to, if you didn't know it then, you might clarify it at the end. That's really strong as well. It's really important to know both strengths and weaknesses. It's such a common questions that gets answered. And it's not a trick. Like I say, it's often on the weaknesses, it's about growth mindset. I didn't know this then, but what I have done is go away and find that out. Another sort of questions that we have is technical questions. In particular, I work in the tech sector of recruitment. This is a really prominent question. If someone doesn't understand sort of the technical areas that they're going to be doing on a day-to-day, or something that's really frequent in their job, they're going to really struggle. So understanding the technical areas of a role. You've got value-based questions that is used to sort of determine and share organizations' values and understand their culture. Again, this will go to sort of a lot of the things that Maria said as well in terms of preparation and research. Really going to be strong. Sometimes you'll get often asked in interviews, what do you know about us? Or what can you tell us about our company? And you'll be so surprised how sometimes people aren't prepared, or they don't know. Maybe they've spoke to a recruiter and been put forward to 3, 4, 5, 6 interviews, and they're just turning up. They're not actually doing any research or any background about the company. So really sort of doing your preparation and research and sort of checking on the culture is very, very important. And there's also going to be motivational questions as well. What is your why? A lot of the times we use it to motivate our own employees. We'll look back on goals. But really, you want to be selling yourself. Why is it that you want to work for this company? What is it that's going to get you going? What is it on those sort of cold January nights when it's getting dark at 4 o'clock? What is going to keep you motivated to sort of work in here? And what is going to sort of really get the best out of you? So it's really important to sort of have some ready for some motivational questions as well.
Great, thank you for that. And I think just something to pull out again that you said during one of your answers, Antoni, is that it's not a trick question. None of these are trick questions. And I think this is back to the mindset thing, that we can sometimes go into interviews a bit worried that we're going to get caught out. But actually, it's remembering that the topic of the interview is the one that we ultimately are always going to know best, because it's about ourselves and our experience and our mindsets and motivations and all of those things. So sometimes I just remind myself that actually the people interviewing me, they want to get the best out of me. They do not want to trick me. They don't want me to fall in any of the answers. So I think that's often just a reminder that we know this content. Obviously, we need to prepare to show respect to the whole process and to get the best out of ourselves. We do need to prepare, but none of it's a trick question. Maria, having sort of listened to those different types of interview questions, are there any questions that you really don't like to get asked in an interview? Sometimes I think that's a good place to start, because it means that maybe those are the areas that we need to do a bit more preparation or a bit more thinking around. But are there any that you really don't like to see come up in an interview process?
Thinking on top of my head, I'd say the question about what are your weaknesses, because I think you have to phrase it in a way that shows like a growth mindset. And I think the first time I was ever asked that question, I definitely didn't have that understanding and just said what my weakness was without any kind of strategy or kind of clarification on how I was going to improve on that weakness or how I was working on that particular weakness. So I'd say that was definitely my least favourite question. But just to also add to some of the points Antoni made as well, I think one of the key things to be able to effectively practice and prepare for any interview is to definitely know the type of interview that you're going to be having. Don't just assume that it's going to be competency, because a lot of interviews are competency based. If it's not clarified in the email or document you're sent about the interview, rather, definitely have a call with the recruiter and find out and clarify exactly what the interview type is. Just to add as well, in terms of one of the interview styles I've definitely had a lot of experience in is in strength-based interviews. And usually the questions are phrased in such a way that it's not very obvious that you should use the star example as well because of the way the question is phrased. So, for example, there might be a question on which one do you prefer, meeting a deadline or producing quality work? That question in itself seems like, oh, just choose one, right? But even in that question, utilizing the star method and giving an example and expand on that example is also really important.
Great. And Mari, just thinking back in terms of your experience of interview to date, what can employers or interview panels do to make a candidate feel really comfortable during an interview? And Antoni, maybe this is one for you to think about as well from your experience too.
On top of my head, I'd say being personable. So I think sometimes you're so intimidated by the process. So I think anything the interviewer can do, whether it's even offer you a glass of water, something that's like that, to kind of like humanize the process much
Yeah,
more,
absolutely.
would be great.
Yeah, I think exactly that. Just that word that you said, humanize, and just bring it back to remembering that it's a conversation ultimately between a few people, and it doesn't have to be this hugely intimidating process that sometimes we build it up to be. Antony, just in terms of the wider process, what sorts of things is a candidate able to ask before an interview?
The best interviews are the ones where there's sort of no limits. Of course, you need to keep it appropriate, but you can take the questions wherever you want to. I always feel some successful interviews are ones that I like a lot, or when I feel like I'm being interviewed as well. I
Right.
feel like the questions are coming both ways, and almost I'm getting as many questions back as I'm asking, and I'm not having to keep probing. But also when it becomes very conversational as well. So it doesn't have to stick to a strict script, but if the person that I'm interviewing comes in with different questions or wants to dive into that topic a little bit more, and we're going with the flow and we're not sort of following sort of set guidelines, I always find those are the best interviews. So as long as it's appropriate, the questions can be whatever they are. And also any time as well. Don't necessarily have to wait till the end of the interview to sort of wait with any questions that they're sort of noting down. If there's any questions beforehand, like Maria said, if something's not sort of clarified before the interview, ask then. If there's something that just as the interview's starting that you're not too sure about, questions can be asked then. So in terms of what questions and when questions can be asked, I feel like the better the interview is when there's no sort of script, there's no set deadline. It's please do ask at any time and anything you need.
And Maria mentioned earlier that sometimes with the nerves and with the preparation of the whole interview process, we can forget that there's always that question at the end of an interview, do you have anything to ask us? And our minds can just go blank. So, Antoni, are there any questions that are good for a candidate to ask at the end of an interview?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a sort of link into what Maria said as well, is given the opportunity to clarify something that wasn't too sure about. And a really strong question that you can ask is, do you have any sort of reservations about me at this point? Now, the reason that is quite powerful though at the end is because maybe you have got to the end of the interview and the people in the room are a little unsure about something, or their mind wasn't quite made up on a particular area. Now, if that question is not asked, they're going to go away and still have those doubts and still have a bit of uncertainty. But if you're able to ask that question at the end, it might prompt a response where they actually explain what they're a little bit unsure about. But that also gives you another opportunity to clear anything up. It gives you another opportunity to give an example when you might have done that one thing that they're not sure about. Maybe it just wasn't covered in your CV, or maybe it just wasn't touched about in the interview. If you're able to ask that question, what reservations do you have about me? It gives a great opportunity to explain yourself and another way of sort of clearing up any doubts.
Brilliant. That's a great tip. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna bring it to an end soon, but I just want to ask you both one final question. And essentially, that is, what is the ultimate piece of advice you'd give to somebody preparing for their first interview? And Maria, you gave us a list of really great ways to prepare for an interview at the beginning. But if you had one tip for people listening to the podcast, what would that be?
I'll add on to Antoni's point, actually. Definitely come in with questions to ask. I think some of the questions that you could ask is, how would you describe the characteristics of someone who really excels in this role? Because that gives you an opportunity to really understand what they're looking for and whether you are the right fit for the role. Also asking about the career journeys of the people you're interviewing in the company. So asking about how they've progressed, what has their journey been so far, and just allowing them to give you their own perspective of what the company is like. Because bear in mind, they're currently working in the company on a day-to-day basis. You have an outside perspective of the company's culture and the company's values, but by actually exploring more about the interviewer, you actually get a real perspective on what it's truly like to work in the company. You get those kind of essential clues as well.
Brilliant. And I think actually, just before we come to you, Antoni, Maria, you make such a good point there about the fact that it's remembering that yes, you're in the interview because you most likely want to work for that company one day, but actually that company should want to sell themselves to you as well. So it really is a two-way process, and it's not just you having to go in there and fully sell yourself, but you should want to find out more, and that company should want to win you over as well. So I think that's a really good point. Thank you for that. And then, Anthony, just back to you for any final tips for our listeners on preparing for or undertaking interviews.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer as well there. What I would say for my sort of tip is be confident in your ability, but not too overconfident that your skills and experience don't come across. If I think back to when I was sort of first interviewing for, say, my first full-time job outside of uni, everything I did before this was sport. So I studied sport at university, studied sport at masters, worked in sport, and then come to the end of university and I was applying for roles. And there was actually this internship that was unpaid, working throughout the summer holiday. But there was really good links with Sport England. Now, if you looked at what I'd done in the past, I was probably overqualified. I'd worked at Wimbledon for the previous 2 years. I'd done a lot with UKA sport in preparation to the London 2012 preparation. Everything on my CV, everything I'd done, all my experience was way sort of overqualified for this. And I sort of knew that as well. So when I went into the interview, I was so laid back, so chilled. Anything they asked, I could do it. Yeah, I've done way harder. I've worked much longer hours. I know you're saying that you need someone to be working hard. When I was working at Wimbledon, we were doing crazy hours. And I wasn't able to really express my skills, my experience. But going back to your point, I wasn't able to sell myself. I wasn't telling the story correctly about myself because it just wasn't coming out across. I was too overconfident. And I just really didn't sort of showcase my true ability. And that was the feedback that I was given. And it was a real shock. And I didn't realize it at the time. It wasn't until I heard it. I was like, damn, yeah, that's absolutely right. There's no way I was able to sort of give that energy that you need for this role, really show you what I've done in my previous placements, that I've been working with these really high sort of sports organizations. You would not have got that from the way we were speaking. So be confident in your ability. And I guess that also goes the opposite way as well. Don't be too underconfident where you're not saying anything. Really find that middle game where you're able to really sell your story on you, but make sure your skills and experience are coming across to a point where you can showcase everything you've done.
Amazing. Go ahead, Maria.
Just to add extra tips, because they're coming back in my mind now. Another thing is definitely come early so that you don't have to worry and stress. You don't want to make it worse. So just come early so that you're not stressed out even more. Wear comfortable clothing. So that's also less stress that you have to deal with in the interview process. If your interview is a group presentation, for example, don't be intimidated by the other members of the group. Try to still contribute, try to add value where you see that you can add value in the conversation as well. Like Antoni said, they're not necessarily looking for perfection, but if you can show a growth mindset, if you can show that you're actually being thoughtful and putting in clear effort, that's going to get you some of those good points as well. Also, utilize the career service that you have at school and at university. I know at my university we had folders and it documented students who had done internships in all these different companies, and they would document the questions they were asked, what the interview style was, how they felt it went. And so being able to like have that resource to go back to and find out, okay, what were some of the past questions this company in particular asked in this particular role, was helpful in terms of helping me to prepare as well and create effective answers for those potential questions. And also, it's unlikely that every question that you practice and prepare for is going to be asked. It's going to be asked probably in a different way, or there might be completely different questions. But still practicing before you go to the interview helps you to build the confidence and competence in yourself to retrieve from all the previous practice answers that you have, to kind of create a new one as well. So definitely still practice even if you're worried that the questions might not be what you've practiced for as well.
Absolutely. I love that. So, just to summarize, use all the resources available to you, practice as much as you can to become comfortable. And something that was so important that you said that we hadn't actually touched upon is to think a bit more broadly about the logistics of getting there, of feeling comfortable, because all of those things are going to help you be more successful. And I think the final thing that I'd say is going into each interview knowing that regardless of the outcome, you are going to learn something from the process, whether that's about yourself and what you need to work on, or actually what you want to get from an organization, or how you want to develop your skills, regain your confidence. So it's always going to be a learning curve, and it's never going to be a waste of time. Right, so I think that brings us to a natural close for today. A huge thank you to both of you on behalf of the EY Foundation. I know that everybody listening will have found that so useful. I genuinely feel like I learned a lot myself. And like I said at the beginning, this is something that we will all have to do throughout our career. And it's not something that's just for those at the beginning of their career, but throughout the whole journey. So really, really useful. So, yeah, that is all for today. Thank you all for listening. If you like today's episode, please click to follow us and leave a review, as it will help more people find us. We will be back soon with more fantastic guests on the next episode of the series. But in the meantime, keep an eye out for our mini-sode, and thank you once again to our wonderful guests, Antoni and Maria.